It's often said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. One image in the right lens can tell a lifetime of stories. It can provide a glimpse into a past world, and sometimes it can help us save what has been lost. It can remind us of an era, a society, even a person whom time has left behind. Theodore Herrmann is a man worth remembering. His name is not recorded in textbooks, nor on plaques. He has no statues, gave no famous speeches, never held authority. In traditional terms, he has no lasting legacy. His lone street sign honoring his memory even misspells his name. But who years ago gave all that he could give so that his peers could forge on without him. 3/4 of a century ago, Herrmann left the small, upstate town of Ravena, New York, for the final time. After nearly 8 decades, he has slowly faded from town memory. All that is left is a long-forgotten photograph. Once, at the height of World War II, it was published in hundreds of newspapers across the country. It represented liberation and the hope that a tumultuous period in world history was nearing its end. Now, it sits buried in the annals of history. But even after so long, it can still help us tell his story.
Germany has invaded Poland.
This is London.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press.
General mobilization has been ordered in Britain and France.
This country is at war with Germany.
The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl
I
Harbor.
regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. A state of war.
Theodore William Edward Herrmann was born March 31st, 1915, in Ravena, New York, the son of Max and Barbara Herrmann. Named after his paternal grandfather, Theodore was a first-generation American. His parents both emigrated from Bavaria, Germany, in the early 20th century. The couple had no other children. Theodore was their only son. Herrmann, nicknamed Dutch by his classmates, attended school locally and graduated in 1933 from Ravena High School. The 5'10", 190-pound immigrant's son was outgoing, friendly, and well-liked by his peers, and found himself an active member of the community. He spent 4 years in the Athletic Association, 2 as class treasurer, the basketball team manager, tennis player, and sports editor of the school paper, and also spent time as president of the Library Club, treasurer of the Athletic Association, and captain of the magazine Drive. He was a member of the Boy Scouts of America, earning the rank of Life Scout. Following school, Herrmann spent time as the president of the Ravena Alumni Association and was an active member of the Ravena Hose Company. Of course, perhaps one of his best documented hobbies was his fascination with stamps. After graduating, he founded the Ravena Stamp Club, serving as its president as the organization grew until it was eventually folded into the Hudson Valley chapter of the League for International Fellowship. As the 1940s began, the war in Europe was hitting full swing. But in the States, American military intervention was still nearly 2 years off. While the U.S. practiced an isolationist policy with many Americans hoping to stay out of the conflict, the military still recognized the need to boost its numbers. If circumstances called them to fight, they needed to have the manpower to sustain it. In September 1940, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Selective Service Act. Men ages 21 to 36 were required to register, and in October 1940, the first peacetime draft in American history commenced.
Our present program will train 800,000 additional men this coming year. It is a program, obviously, of defensive preparation.
Young men across the country entered the service in waves. 25-year-old Herrmann was one of the first to leave Ravena, his number, 194, drawn second in the second call for draftees in early January 1941. He left his job at the Coxsackie Milling Company, where he worked since graduating high school, and along with 12 other local men, left for induction into the U.S. Army on the 15th in Albany, New York. Soon he was on his way south to North Carolina, joining the recently activated 9th Infantry Division at Fort Bragg. There he spent a grueling 13 weeks in basic training with the 9th, a unit nicknamed the Old Reliables, with heritage dating back to the First World War. The troops received a crash course in everything from basic military doctrine, including courtesy and discipline, army organization, marching, and hygiene, to rifle squad, platoon, and company tactics, mine and booby trap identification, marksmanship, heavy weapons training, and mental conditioning. A planned additional 40 weeks of unit training followed in order to prepare the division for potential combat. Herrmann was assigned to the 39th Infantry Regiment Fighting Falcons of the 9th Division, and spent the duration of the war with the unit. He was a member of H Company, a heavy weapons section. His specific job is unclear. No records of his duties have been found, but we can extrapolate based on his rank in the standard makeup and use of weapons companies during World War II. The typical weapons company is made of 2 36-man machine gun platoons and 1 58-man mortar platoon, in addition to a headquarters attachment. Heavy weapons companies were often used in support of the standard infantry companies that made up the remainder of the battalion, and thus bore as much of the weight of battle as their riflemen comrades. Flexibility and heavy firepower, the modus operandi.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air. President Roosevelt has just announced.
Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of...
In December 1941, Imperial Japanese forces surprised the Americans at Pearl Harbor, officially bringing the United States into the global conflict.
We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
Overnight, the attitude of the country changed. Many of those who had lobbied for isolationism now flocked to recruiting stations, eager to join the fight. For Herrmann and many others, months of early preparation suddenly seemed fruitful. Combat, whether with the Japanese or Germans, was imminent. In April 1942, Herrmann returned home on leave before his deployment, as documented by a Ravena News Herald clipping. He appeared at a local Rotary Club meeting giving testimony about his 15 months of experience in the service. He said goodbye to his family and friends and returned to maneuvers in North Carolina. It was the last time they would see him alive. By mid-September, the 9th was bound for the Atlantic. Herrmann and the men of the 39th Regiment 9th Division became the first American combat troops to set foot on foreign soil, when they landed overseas at Inverary, Scotland on October 17th. Of course, the United Kingdom was an allied nation. The men's next stop was not nearly as friendly. Just a month later, Herrmann and the 9th Division became the first American troops to engage the enemy in offensive ground operations as a part of Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. In November 1942, elements of the division arrived in the Mediterranean Sea with a mission: secure the continent's northern coast to protect the vital Mediterranean link to the Middle and Far East. Herrmann's 39th Regiment, alongside the 47th and 60th Regiments, hit the shores at Algiers, Safi, and Port Lyautey in the early morning hours of November 8th, facing resistance from Axis-aligned French soldiers.
I remember when we went into Safi, North Africa, we hit the beaches at 4:45 in the morning and unloaded there, and we took the harbor. We had one man was hit right between the eyes with a 50 caliber bullet that didn't kill him. It went right over the top of his head, through the helmet, and out the backside. He had an awful concussion, but we didn't lose a man.
The inexperienced GIs found initial success. By the 11th, the French resistance had collapsed. During the fighting, the men of the 9th became the first to liberate a city from Axis control in World War II, when the 3rd Battalion, 47th Regiment took Safi. In the coming days, the 9th would move east to Tunisia, where they took an active role in operations against the infamous Afrika Korps, the experienced and battle-hardened German expeditionary force on the continent.
From there, we were in a bivouac area in the little town of Magenta, right on the little Sahara Desert. Temperatures there were like 120, 130. We had dysentery, we had all that stuff to contend with.
The notorious 9th spent February through May 1943 fighting near the bloody Kasserine Pass and El Guitar, and played a major part, Hermann's 39th Regiment having a leading role in an offensive drive towards the town of Bizerte, a push which culminated in German capitulation in Tunisia in May 1943, marking the last of German presence in Africa. While overall a success, the losses sustained in the North African campaign called into question the adequacy of out-of-date American equipment and troop preparedness. Yet Herrmann, having experienced his first taste of combat, didn't dampen his belief in the American fighting force. In the final days of the offensive, he penned a short letter home to his family, brimming with optimism.
Dear folks, just a line or two to let you know I'm receiving the News Herald regularly, and I'm glad to keep posted on the news from home. I haven't seen Walter Bronk, Fred Lawson, or anyone else from home as of yet, but hope to any day now. This is a great army I'm in, and growing greater after each encounter with the enemy. Who knows when he's had enough? In 2 years, we've done the impossible, and shown the world that the American is as great a defender of liberty as he is a lover of it. Our food is okay. Cigarettes and supplies are fairly easy to get, and our mail service the tops. Who could ask for anything more? Well, this is all for now. Hope you are all in good health and the best of spirits. Regards to all. Yours, Theodore Herrmann.
After Tunisia, the crazy rumor got around that we were going to load on boats for home. We loaded on boats, all right, but for Sicily, which, believe me, was no place like home.
After their first foray into a combat zone, Herrmann's 9th Infantry found just a brief respite from action. By August of 1943, the division shifted gears to the northern Mediterranean in an attempt to fully secure the waters from Axis attacks on shipping, as well as force Germany to divert forces from the Russian front and remove Italy from the conflict. Herrmann's 39th Regiment joined the 82nd Airborne Division as a regimental combat team, fighting in a push north of the beaches of Sicily.
We landed at a little place called Agrigenta, I believe, and went up the west coast of Sicily to Marsala and captured that.
Later, when the rest of the division joined Herrmann's regiment, the 39th drove through the mountains towards Messina, captured Cherami, and directly assaulted the heavily fortified Troina head-on. An 8-day slugfest up rocky heights with a dug-in enemy, resulting in heavy casualties.
I fought the Germans up through Nicosia, Troina, which was barren rock.
We had to stop and slug it out in the mountains all along the way. Like Troina. Pretty mountain town. But after 21 Jerry counterattacks, it looked like this. We won all right, but we paid.
It was during this conflict in Sicily that the 39th Fighting Falcons earned their famous moniker from commanding officer Colonel Harry Flint. AAA bar none.
The colonel of our regiment, he had a ranch in Texas, and the emblem of that ranch was 3 A's with a zero, with a line through them, 0, which meant anything, anywhere, anytime, bar nothing. And he adopted that as the motto of his regiment. So all of our helmets had AAA bar 0.
The slogan, a testament to their ability in combat, stuck, and soldiers of the 39th soon began painting the acronym on helmets and other equipment. When questioned about the soundness of wearing the identifying marks in combat, Colonel Flint explained, "The enemy who sees our regiment in combat, if they live through the battle, will know to run the next time they see us coming." By mid-August, the 9th Division's fighting in Sicily had come to an end. Following a period of rest and retraining, the unit boarded ships headed for England in November. The 9th had already seen combat in 3 brutal campaigns, but the biggest was yet to come. Overlord. The invasion of Hitler's Fortress Europe.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity.
Because of its veteran status, the 9th Infantry Division hit the beaches of Normandy, France, on June 10, 1944, 4 days after the initial assault. Entering through Utah Beach, the division engaged the enemy just 2 days later, beginning the crucial drive to seal off the Cotentin Peninsula on the northern coast. A series of conflicts to close off main roads along the western corridor occurred, and their success meant trapping the Germans within the peninsula.
One night when we were moving forward across the peninsula, something like that, we were on this side, and we traveled most of the night. We must have lost our way. And when it got daylight, we were on the other side. And we could see water again, he said. And we radioed back. We're on the other side. And they said, well, dig in, you know, if you got the other side. And there was one road that the Germans were using, and we had the high position. And by then, all day long, we just fire away. Until the road got so blocked up that they couldn't get in there and then stop, and then we'd have them trapped.
The most imperative goal of the drive, however, was one location: Cherbourg.
In our unit, we were the first ones to capture a port of Cherbourg. Cherbourg, yeah, I think that's what it's called, Cherbourg.
At the green tip of Normandy, the town of Cherbourg lay, a harbor for supplies. Our need for ports was vital as our breath. The German knew our lack and swiftly drew his forces into tight defensive groups so to contest the issue. All our plans turned upon Cherbourg. All our strategy waited upon its empty docks and piers. So the Americans, sent all across Normandy to the coast, swung toward the north, impatient for the port. Through hedge and field, they carved their heavy way.
Prior to the invasion, the Allied command knew that quick reinforcement and buildup of troops was crucial. American units and equipment coming from the States had to be unloaded and reloaded in the UK before departure for France. But if they could capture a deep water port in France, troops and supplies could be brought directly from the States. Cherbourg was that port, the largest accessible in the area. It was thus vital not only to the Normandy campaign, but to the entire war effort against Nazi Germany. On June 18th, the regiments of the 9th, including Hermann's 39th, reached the west coast of the Cotentin Peninsula, isolating the German units at Cherbourg from possible reinforcement. Within a day, the division, alongside the 4th and 79th Infantry, began a push north. 48 hours later, the units were in striking distance of the critical port. Despite being surrounded and low on supplies, the German garrison commander, with some 21,000 men, refused offers of surrender. So the American assault began on June 22nd. The Americans met stiff initial resistance but slowly cleared the enemy from bunkers and concrete pillboxes. In conjunction with naval bombardments of the fortifications, ground units finished off the organized defense and captured the garrison commander. By June 29th, the harbor and arsenal had surrendered. Cherbourg and the Cotentin Peninsula were now securely in American hands. It was here, too, as he walked the streets of Cherbourg, that Theodore Herrmann, now a sergeant, was first seen by thousands of Americans. As he and thousands of U.S. troops poured into the newly liberated port, Herrmann spotted a familiar sight, an illustration of the Boot of Italy, whom he had stood a shore away from just a year ago, tacked to a board. The enemy propaganda poster sneered at the Allies' slow progress in the Mediterranean, depicting a snail holding a British and American flag with the caption in both French and English, "It's a long way to Rome." As he stood, surrounded by a triumphant American army, Herrmann took out his trench knife and smiled. A photographer captured this image, circulated by the Associated Press to hundreds of newspapers across the country. From a small town of less than 3,000, Herrmann's name now on the lips and grin in the eyes of thousands of hopeful Americans on the home front. This caption from a Virginian paper.
June 1944. Sergeant Theodore Herrmann of Ravena, New York, chuckles as, with his trench knife, he rips one of Herr Goebbels' propaganda posters off the wall of a Cherbourg building. The poster is a map of Italy, showing British and American forces in the south symbolized by a slow-moving snail, with the caption, "It's a long way to Rome." Doesn't look so far now, does it?
After the capture of Cherbourg, the 9th continued their push through the hedgerow country of France. The unit helped in the American breakout from the Normandy beachheads in Operation Cobra, and later suffered heavily in the brutal combat of the infamous Hurtgen Forest, along the Belgian-German border, a location which earned the monikers the Death Factory and the Meat Grinder. In the wet, cold, and cloudy weather, Herrmann and the 9th became the first American unit involved in the Hurtgen Forest fighting in mid-September 1944, where they fought an entrenched German army intent on holding the area for a future winter offensive. Soon they were joined by 10 other infantry divisions and 2 armored divisions, though tanks were often ineffective due to the dense woods, which hampered mobility and allowed German anti-tank teams plenty of cover.
We're in the Hurtgen Forest then. And that was rough. I mean, I went in there the first day, and the bodies I seen are bloated and blown apart.
And were you ever scared or fearful?
Always, yeah. But it was part of the atmosphere of where in the Hurtgen Forest. Everybody was very careful in the early afternoon to be in their foxholes because the Germans would send a few rounds of the 88 millimeter cannon. There was always somebody getting hurt or somebody having a psychological breakdown.
And so how did you cope with their deaths?
You basically learn to live with it, to adapt to it.
In all, the U.S. First Army estimated between 33,000 and 55,000 Americans killed or wounded over 4 months in the dense woods. making it one of the costliest engagements of the war. In the winter of 44, the 9th saw battle in the Ardennes forest in Belgium, the site of a last-ditch German counteroffensive known as the Battle of the Bulge. Through blizzards, frostbite, trench foot, and artillery shelling, the 9th Infantry Division moved in support of battered American units being rapidly pushed back by the German attack, arriving in the area on December 17, 1944. The notorious 9th helped hold the line and repel the attack. A Stars and Stripes newspaper said of the events, "Neither rain, nor snow, nor Hitler's SS can stop the 9th Infantry Division." As winter began turning to spring in early 1945, the German military situation looked bleak. Running low on men, gasoline, and other supplies, the German army fought last-ditch efforts for every inch of land as the Allies marched towards Berlin. The advance, however, was not slowing much. As February 1945 rolled around, it seemed the European war was nearing its end. On February 27th, Hermann and the 9th Division prepared for a push south from Leversbach, Germany. The 2nd Battalion 39th Infantry, of which Hermann's H Company was a part, moved towards the town of Thum at 4:45 a.m., taking and holding the town in the face of mortar and small arms fire, and a strong battalion-strength counterattack at 9:30. In conjunction with the 1st and 3rd Battalions, the attack was continued early the following morning, Hermann's company's heavy weapons supporting the 3 rifle companies' advance. Again, on the 28th, the 2nd Battalion launched their drive at 4:45 a.m., pushing east towards Freudsheim. In the early afternoon, the unit came in contact with a German anti-tank gun emplacement on their left flank, which temporarily halted the advance of the leading company. Simultaneously, small arms and mortar fire opened up on their right. When the anti-tank gun was knocked out, the advance continued, but almost immediately after, the unit again came under German small arms fire. Then, suddenly, from a distant ridgeline on the right, German self-propelled artillery fire. Suddenly, a burst of metal shards rips into Hermann's face, along his jaw. He is violently thrown to the ground, the concussive blast and blood loss staggering him. Dazed and in pain, Hermann surveys the scene around him. A number of H Company men are down, wounded by the same blast. His comrades scream for help, and medics rush to their aid. One stops at Hermann's side and kneels, and just for a moment, hesitates. Then, he gets to work, patching what he can in the field to try to stabilize him, before moving the wounded GI. Hermann is rushed to a field hospital, a pop-up tent in a flat patch of German countryside, filled with battered men. Medical staff surround him. Officially, he is diagnosed with a concussion. He has been hit by shrapnel, hot metal fragments splintered off an artillery shell, which have penetrated his head. His nerves and arteries are remarkably intact, but blood quickly flows from his wounds. Field surgeons weigh his chances. Shards of metal are still lodged in Hermann's head. An aide leans down and gives him penicillin to prevent infections. But infections are not the pressing issue right now. It's impossible to tell, after all these years, how conscious Herrmann was of his surroundings that day in late February. Whether he recognized where he was or what was happening as he lay in the field hospital, or if the pain was too immense to remain cognizant. But what we can extrapolate, based on his life to this point and the circumstances. Somewhere in Germany, Theodore Herrmann lays on a cot, losing blood profusely, and thinks of home. Of his job at the Coxsackie Milling Company, his 4th grade honor roll achievement, his classmates, his fellow athletes, his remarkable stamp collection, assembled over years of attending local conventions, compiling, and saving. He thinks of his parents, and how difficult it will be for them if he doesn't make it home. He is an only child, after all. The immigrant's son is just 4 weeks shy of his 30th birthday. He wonders how he will celebrate. His parents have probably already sent their gift. The mail service on the front was still pretty good. It should be here soon, he figures. He wonders how often his parents think of him, what they wish for him. They've always been good parents, supportive, not nosy. As night falls on the 28th, he thinks about the irony of dying in the country his parents left. But as he takes his final breath, he knows that he has spent the last few years giving life and limb for the dream they so desired. They were safe at home. The war nearly finished. Theodore's job was done.
News of servicemen. Word was received by Mr. and Mrs. Max Herrmann on Sunday that their only son, Theodore, had been reported to have died from wounds received in action in Germany on March 1st. Theodore was a staff sergeant assigned to the 30th...
In late April 1945, Adolf Hitler shot himself. Just a week later, on May 8th, German military representatives met with Allied leaders in Berlin and signed the Instrument of Surrender. After nearly 6 years, the war in Europe was finally over, and the Nazis defeated. Staff Sergeant Theodore Herrmann had made it through some of the fiercest fighting of the Second World War, seeing combat in Africa, Sicily, France, and into Germany. 4 years in the service, but died of his wounds sustained in action on March 1st, 1945, just 3 months before the war's end. He was initially buried in Henri Chapelle American Cemetery in Belgium. For years, a young local woman adopted and took care of his grave. In 1947, Herrmann's parents received a letter from her.
February 1, 1947. I frequently visit the grave of your son and take the liberty to adorn it with flowers out of a sentiment of deep thankfulness for the great sacrifice this dear young and brave man had to offer on our behalf. I wish I could tell how much I feel for you and how well I understand the immensity of your sacrifice. Let me have a part in your motherly suffering, and may it be a consolation to you that there is someone near your son's grave who lovingly takes care of this last resting place. In a short time, I shall be able to send you a special photo of your dear son's grave. I send my kindest and very respectful love. Your little Belgian friend, Lucy Williams.
Theodore Herrmann was not the only one to leave Ravena and join the fight. He wasn't even the only man to be killed in the process. But his story like so many others, deserves to be remembered. Theodore's voice hasn't been heard in 75 years, since the waning months of the Second World War. He himself can no longer tell his story or the story of his famous photograph. But he doesn't need to. His picture speaks volumes.